All right, terrific. So I'm going to start by introducing a good friend of mine and the executive director of the International OCD Foundation, Jeff Szymanski. You're going to kick us off, Jeff.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Virtual Voices for Mental Health Rally and Training. So how did we get here? The IOCDF has organized the annual Capitol Walk on the National Mall in DC for the past 3 years. We've done this with the help of several partner organizations, some of whom have partnered with us for this event, as Susan just mentioned, and we'll hear from them in just a few minutes. In particular, though, I want to first recognize Elspeth Bell and OCD Mid-Atlantic, who have been instrumental in organizing our in-person events in DC, and we look forward to a time where we can be working together again in person. We've wanted to take the awareness raising part of the Capitol Walk and build off of that energy for an event to begin advocating for bills in Congress that we think are important to the OCD and related disorders community. So what's the point of this event? What are we trying to accomplish? In fact, we want Congress to pass bills that help people access mental health treatment. We're going to get into the details of what the bills we want to be passed and why, but first I want to discuss the process that we are trying to make an impact on. Many people are coming to this event with different levels of experience and knowledge about public policy and how a bill becomes a law. It's important to have that common vocabulary, even if we've all seen that video of how a bill becomes a law. I love that video. All of the legislation you will hear about today has been introduced into the legislative process by a representative or senator. The representative or senator who introduces a bill is referred to as the bill's sponsor. Once the bill has been introduced, it begins the process of becoming a law. The bills we are advocating for aren't very far along in the process, though. So we want more members of Congress to be aware that they exist and are important, and for those who agree with the bills to take a public stance in support. One way senators and representatives can do this is by becoming a co-sponsor of a bill. The sponsor of a bill is the one who has filed it, but other senators and representatives can sign up to become co-sponsors to signal their support for the changes the bill seeks to make. During tomorrow's day of action, we are going to be asking for senators and representatives to co-sponsor our 6 priority bills and thank those who have already done so. This is the first time we're organizing this event. I'm very excited to see so many people around the US have signed up. As Susan mentioned, over 40 different states represented. And so on behalf of the IOCDF, our Virtual Voices partners, and the OCD and related disorders community, thank you so much for being here. And back to Susan.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you for being here with us tonight. I hope you'll stay and continue to answer some questions throughout the evening. All right, so I think next we will go to some of our partners that have joined us tonight. And the first partner that we're going to be talking with is Jennifer Rakes. Jennifer is the executive director of the TLC Foundation for BFRBs. And for those of you that may not be as familiar with BFRBs, those are body-focused repetitive behaviors. And so with that, I will turn this over to Jennifer.
Thank you so much. I am so happy to be here tonight. So as just mentioned, I'm the executive director of the TLC Foundation for what we shorten to BFRBs, body-focused repetitive behaviors. So TLC represents the 1 in 20 people who live with BFRBs, which include trichotillomania, which is a compulsion to pull out your hair, skin picking disorder, when you pick at your skin repetitively, and others. BFRBs seem to be part of the OCD family. Maybe we're cousins, cousin disorders, and they're even less well known. So I'm really, really thankful to IOCDF for leading the charge in developing this event today and inviting us to be a partner. Like IOCDF, TLC is the only organization in the world devoted to raising public awareness, providing scientifically backed information, emotional support, access to current best practice treatments, and developing more effective treatments through research in our case, specifically for BFRBs. This is a big mission with a lot of challenges. But one thing that's been key to making all the progress that we've made in all of these areas of our work has been raising our voices, speaking up and speaking out. And so I'm thrilled that so many people are interested in joining us and IOCDF and the other partners in speaking out tonight and tomorrow. I come to this work as a person with trichotillomania myself, and now as the mother of 2 young girls who are both struggling with trichotillomania and skin picking disorder. So I know firsthand that these aren't easy topics to discuss. Raising our voices in a world that is still largely uneducated about BFRBs and OCD, and frankly, most mental health disorders can be complicated and can feel emotionally risky. But I will testify from my own life that it's also deeply rewarding and even healing. And it's truly the only way to cure our problems. Access to treatment remains one of the biggest needs of our community. Some of the barriers to accessing treatment might be specific to our particular disorders, but a lot of the barriers to getting treatment are broader issues that affect all of us, and or anyone who's seeking mental health treatment in this country. And that's why it's particularly powerful that we can come together as partners to unite across our specific disorders and address these really big issues that stand in our way. I know that later in this program, we're going to get into the details of the specific pieces of legislation that we're going to address. But I'm really so happy with the work of the team at IOCDF and thankful that all the partners were able to give input, that these pieces of legislation have really been, just beautifully curated into, ones that really hit the sort of 3 big issues that I see as barriers that are beyond our specific disorders, but just big picture barriers: cost of treatment, payment for treatment, the severe shortage of mental health clinicians, and systemic racism that creates disparities in access to care across different communities in our country. All 3 of these problems are often interrelate and are interconnected. And so some of the bills that you'll be hearing about, also are sort of interconnected and cross a couple of those different topics, which I think is really a beautiful thing. Despite the progress, I'm just going to speak a little bit about why this is so important to our community. Despite the progress we've made over the years, there's still a severe shortage of clinicians who specialize in BFRBs and all mental health disorders, and even more so when you're seeking help for children. And both OCD and BFRBs are problems that often emerge in childhood. For BFRBs, we know that about 1 in 20 people experience a BFRB in their lifetime. And in many states, we have, one of the things that TLC does is provide referrals to treatment providers, as I know IOCDF does. There are many states where we have just a tiny handful of clinicians for the entire state. Many states where we have just 1 clinician for the entire state, and some where we have none. So there's a huge problem with access to treatment, just simply due to a shortage of clinicians. It's heartbreaking when someone calls and you have to tell them that there's no one that's physically close to them. So that's why the rise of telehealth is so important, and perhaps one of the big silver linings of this horrible struggle that we've had this year with COVID. If we can see some of the rules change to make telehealth more accessible and more legal, that will be a huge boon to our community. We need to make sure that these changes actually become law, because otherwise they won't last past the sort of short time frames that some of them have been crafted in for this emergency. And having the best treatment in the world available to you is not helpful if you can't pay for it. And so lack of insurance coverage for mental health treatment is an enormous barrier to getting treatment for most people. And we witness that at TLC every single day. We're also aware that BFRBs and OCD don't discriminate. And yet we know that there are great disparities in what communities in this country are able to access treatment. So the first step to solving these kinds of disparities are to really document and understand them. So I'm glad that, that some of the legislation we'll be talking about this evening is also addressing that issue. Finally, I just want to share that this form of advocacy, that reaching out to your representatives, whether by phone or email or letter, can be hugely effective. Being the squeaky wheel works. Most people don't take the time to express their views to their representatives, but making it clear that we are paying attention and that we do care does have the effect of focusing their attention on our issue. I attended a meeting just last week of held by the National Institute of Mental Health, and the director of the NIMH, Dr. Josh Gordon, was asked how funding gets allocated for research between different disorders and different priorities. And he said that getting letters to the NIMH from the public makes a difference, and the feedback that they get from legislators about what their constituents have told them are priorities also make a difference. So in addition to helping pass the laws that you might be helping with this effort, you may also be having a broader ripple effect by just bringing these disorders to the forefront of the minds of your representatives, and it could have ripple effects into research funding and other areas as well. So the time you take to write these emails and reach out to your representatives during this call to action will be time well spent. And I really thank everybody who's participating for doing this. Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was just terrific. And I always appreciate when people are brave and willing to come forward and speak their own stories. So much, much appreciated, and such an important area. I'm amazed at how often I'm asked about BFRBs and how much research is still needed. And it was really compelling to hear about how it's 1 in 20 people, and yet some states have only 1 or 2 providers. So thank you for talking with us about that. For those of you that are just joining us a little bit later, we're going to have some terrific speakers here from a number of our different partner organizations, and then as well as some from the community. And then we're going to, at the end of the evening, we're going to talk about how you can be empowered to be an advocate. And we'll give you very specific action steps and tools to actually take action steps tomorrow with all of us. We've got over 330 registered participants in 43 states that will be joining us tomorrow. And we want to make sure that we answer all of your questions tonight. So if you're just joining us, you will see a chat there. We'll try to answer questions during the chat, and we'll also have a live Q&A at the end of the night. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our next speaker. This is Lauren Mckinney, and she is the CEO and founder of the Picking Me Foundation. And I'm super excited to hear from her tonight. Lauren?
Yes, hi, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. As you mentioned, my name is Lauren Mckinney, and I am the CEO and founder of the Picking Me Foundation, the only nonprofit founded by a skin picker for skin picking. And I'm a silent sufferer turned adamant advocate for mental health, especially dermatillomania or skin picking disorder. And I'm excited to share my story with mental health tonight in hopes to encourage and showcase just how much working together and using our stories can be the place and the factor that causes change. Skin picking disorder controlled my life for about 28 years, and I'm polka dotted in scars and sores head to toe. And I really did everything and anything I could to make you not look too close or ask too many questions. And if you did ask, it probably pulled something from my Rolodex of reasons, like it was just bug bites or a rash or eczema or something like that. But skin picking disorder really affected every area of my life. I didn't have sleepovers because I was embarrassed about the black bed sheets that I had in case I bled. Or in school, bullies would call me leper or polka dots. Sometimes I'd be at my desk and not sure if I looked down, I might see some blood through my sleeve. And sometimes there's a lot of people who I ran into who were just not sure how to deal with me. High school counselors thought I was self-harming. College counselors thought I was using meth. And as I grew older, there was a lot of ways that the disorder continued to affect me, from intimacy and dating, turning into more about closing down than opening up. to showing up at work and getting stuck in the bathroom, stuck in a mirror for a couple hours and trying to think of a reason to explain why. The disorder literally chipped away a lot of my self and my identity. And it wasn't until 2013 that it was recognized by the DSM-5 and included as body-focused repetitive behavior under the umbrella of obsessive compulsive and related disorders. You know, after that, I actually had one of the worst picking episodes that I ever had, and almost lost my leg to contracting MRSA. But it was then and there in the hospital that I heard the word dermatillomania for the first time. And oh my gosh, my ears perked up. You know, I had a name, I had a word, a term. I wanted to, get a button and a t-shirt with it printed on it, take a pill and just be done with this disorder. But no, fortunately, that's just not how it works. But I also learned how misunderstood and underreported skin picking was, and even stigmatized in the already stigmatized mental health community, where it was sometimes considered just a bad habit and not warranting further research. And especially since it was experiencing only around 20% remission rates, and there was still no cure. I mean, I felt deflated and defeated all over again. But I had a word, I had that term, and having it made it feel like that this disorder didn't have me. And so the next time someone asked that all too familiar question to me of, oh, what's with your skin? I kind of experienced this new urge, and I shared the truth. I said, I have dermatillomania, and I haven't shut up since. And I'm sharing my story now because I know what it's like to feel isolated and ashamed and not deserving of proper care. How I had to drive across state lines to find a clinician familiar with my disorder or attend a support group for it. I know what it feels like to feel like you and your mental health are not seen and are not a priority. And these bills that we're talking about tonight, they offer to improve that. Bills to better access quality and quantity of mental health resources for strugglers like me and maybe you or someone you know. But we have to come together and act to do this. You know, my Picking Me Foundation, it wouldn't exist had it not been for the power of collective action. It was me sharing my story, yes, but it was then everyone joining in and sharing theirs, and that momentum that it built, and our voices coming together that really built the home, the foundation that I had been looking for. It's really the power of we. And that's what we want to tap into tomorrow. So I know you might feel like this timing is a bit hard here. There is a lot going on in the world. Is there ever? You might wonder where participation in something like this would fall in your priority list. I'd offer that not only does mental health still matter, it matters now more than ever. And what's wonderful about this online day of action tomorrow is that no matter where or how familiar you are with taking place in this type of advocacy, the IOCDF has it organized so well, making it extremely effective and super easy for us to just participate in it. So whether you're a first timer emailing a politician or a regular in your representative's inbox, great. I cannot think of a better way to get your mental health policy advocacy on. So when you're sending your emails tomorrow, do me a favor and try to include a bit of your story. You know, put your little personal experience with mental health in there as well to pass on, and help remind those readers that we are real people with real experiences behind these messages. With that, I am so excited to join you all tomorrow as we rally behind our laptops and email our stories for mental health support and policy change. Here's to being louder together, and let's do this. Woo.
Thank you, Lauren. That was terrific. I love the phrase, the power of we, and how you highlighted that two ways. The first is just, knowing that your disorder has a name and that there's other people experiencing the same thing. That is just so powerful. I'll never forget the moment when my daughter, I was reading a book to her and I said the word OCD and explained what it was. And she went running to her dad and said, "Dad, there's other people just like me." And I think that's so powerful. And then really bringing that to advocacy. Advocacy for yourself is healing, and advocacy for others is even more healing. And so I love how you brought all that together. Thank you for sharing your story. That was great. All right, terrific. Well, we have our third partner is about to join us, and this is Gabriella True. Gabriella is a friend of mine, and I'm so excited to bring her here tonight. She is the president of the Alliance to Solve PANS and Immune-Related Encephalopathies. And so this is all around immune-mediated OCD and other disorders that come in. The name of her organization is Aspire, A-S-P-I-R-E. And with that, I'd like to welcome Gabriella with us this evening.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Thank you so much for the IOCDF for inviting Aspire to be a partner with you and TLC BFRB and picking me. I had the honor of meeting some of you guys 2 years ago at your conference when Aspire launched. We, like Susan said, we're Alliance to Solve PANS and Immune-Related Encephalopathies. It's a mouthful, but you can find us at www.aspire.care. And if you ever have questions, you can email me at gabriella@aspire.care. I am actually an adult living with PANS, and I have 2 children who are 16-year-old twin boys with PANS. So we live and breathe this all day long. And like everybody has said so far, tomorrow is really about using our voices and our stories. IOCDF has made it so incredibly easy that even if you've never, ever, ever, not once, you don't even know who your senator is, it doesn't matter. They make it so easy for you. And you'll get a series of emails with what to do. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how these really well curated set of bills affect PANS in a very general way. I'm not going to really go into each specific one, but you know, PANS is a newly emerging diagnosis. So a lot of people, including your senators, have no idea what the heck it is. They'll know sort of what OCD is. They'll think it's hand washing. They'll think it's walking in a line, but they won't know that if you have OCD, so PANS is defined by sudden onset OCD and or food restrictions, along with 2 out of 7 of tics, anxiety, aggression, oppositional defiance, urinary frequency, regression, changes in your ability to attend school with suddenly a kid can't do math. So it's a whole host of symptoms into one. And if you want to know the hows, the whys, and all that, you can visit our website or email us. But I'm not going to give you a PANS lecture tonight. But because we're really a newly formed, newly identified disorder, it has really been a small set of scientists and clinicians working on this, and a lot of parents using their voices very well to say, hey, we're here, this thing exists, and you've got to figure it out, and you've got to treat our kids. And I don't care if you don't believe in it, it's not a belief system, it's a fact. So either I'm going to see a new doctor or you're going to listen and learn. And through those voices of all these parents, more and more people have listened and learned. And that's what we'll do again tomorrow and keep doing year after year, is having our senators be the ones tomorrow that are going to listen and learn. And all of these, one of our biggest barriers is having not enough doctors, providers, mental health providers available to A, diagnose, and B, treat. And this is a devastating disorder that is treatable. So especially if you do it very quickly after onset of symptoms, it really does help. So we need access to care immediately. We need access to care in less than a waiting list of 3 years, which we have certain institutions. By some of these telehealth bills in particular, it removes those it can remove some of those barriers to access to care. So if I live in New York and I needed to see a doctor in California or a mental health provider to get a diagnosis or at least get the ball rolling, these bills would help enable that. And then the truth is that sometimes it's really hard, even after we have a diagnosis, they simply get our child in the car to the therapist's office. And, you know, I get every single day an email like, how do I get my kid in the car? I can't even get them to the doctor. I can't get them to the therapist. Like, how are they going to get better if I can't get them to see that doctor? Telehealth is one of the ways to remove this barrier. So if we can have that kid at home, I mean, I know it's an accommodation, but you know, at least they're doing something, gets them to see that doctor. So it's really, truly critical that we remove some of these barriers. And then, like Jennifer was saying, there's discrimination in who is being actually diagnosed and treated for this disorder. People often think of as pandas as a white rich person's disease. Well, that's who's getting treated because that's who can afford out of pocket. And that is who can afford to travel from New York to a different state to be able to get that care. So any bill that we can support that reduces that barrier for everybody is one to be fully supported. Even if it doesn't happen to be PANS, we want those people to be able to access care. Like Lauren was saying, that there are a lot of things going on, you know, in this world, but mental health is 100% going to be a priority always. So these senators and representatives have to know what's affecting their constituents because they're supposed to be working for their constituents and representing us. So in order for them to represent us properly, they have to know about our plight and our children's plight and our personal plights. And this is one way to do it. So I really, to wrap it up, thank you for the IOCDF for creating a system that makes it just easy to access and be able for all of us to start to feel, who've never done this. I mean, I have, but most people haven't, talk to their senators and make it very accessible. Plus in their busy schedule of homeschooling, dealing with PANS flare and all of that, this can get done in between all those things that you have to do, plus make dinner or order pizza. So thank you. And if anybody has any other questions for me later, they can always email me at gabriella@aspire.care. Thank you for inviting Aspire. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Gabriella. That was terrific. As the parent of a child with PANDAS and PANS and OCD, it's always just so great to hear from one of the partner organizations that's out there just raising awareness for parents. There were no parent organizations when my daughter first got sick 15 years ago, and to watch the rise of parents supporting other parents, and then especially how impressive it is that you've already passed so many bills through at so many different state levels to work on getting insurance coverage or awareness around PANDAS and PANS. It's just very, very impressive. It's another one of those examples of the power of advocacy, whether it's self-advocacy or parental advocacy. So I just really appreciate that. Thank you. All right, so now we come to a very exciting portion of our session where we're going to actually talk to some community speakers, and then after we have our community speakers, then we're going to take it back to really looking at how to be trained to be an advocate, and we've got a few speakers on that topic. So don't worry, you are going to get to the specifics of how you can be an advocate tomorrow. But before we get there, I'm really honored this evening to introduce Tawana Watson. She comes to us as the founder of My Sister's Keeper in Northeast Ohio. And she's also been a really helpful participant on a number of the IOCDF town hall events. If you haven't been to one of those yet, we frequently are on Facebook doing town halls on a number of different topics. And you can always check our Facebook page to see what we have there and when Tawana will be speaking again. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to you to speak with us this evening. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, I am Tawana Watson, and I am the CEO and founder of My Sister's Keeper of Northeast Ohio, based in Cleveland, Ohio. It's a 501c4 organization, which means we are able to lobby through my organization. And our main focus is minority mental health among women, young girls and boys, specifically African-American, focusing on OCD and PTSD because I suffer from OCD and PTSD. My story is I don't know, I tell my story a lot, but people tell me it's kind of sad, but I think it's a story of strength because a while ago, when my kids were younger, my baby boy is 22 now, but when they were little kids and he was real little, I thought something was wrong with me. So I ended up going to a hospital here in Cleveland, and I was misdiagnosed with multiple mental health diagnoses, one being schizophrenia. I was put on a lot of heavy medications, Klonopin, Effexor, Ativan, which made me a zombie, which made me gain a whole bunch of weight. And I could not function as a mother to my children. So, and I do not recommend this to anyone. I took myself off of every last one of those medications, went through the withdrawals. My father, being a pastor of a church, told me when I tried to speak to him about it that I needed Jesus and I needed church. So I ended up going to church. Fast forward to 2017, I had a very bad mental breakdown to the point where I couldn't even leave my house. People had to come into my house and take me out because that's how bad my disorder had gotten. And I ended up going to the Cleveland Clinic where I met my therapist and psychiatrist now, who I love very much. And I give them high praise because in a 5-minute conversation, they told me, you have OCD. And they put me on the right health plan. I told Ken, who is my therapist, if you fix me, I'm going to use my voice for people who look like me to help them so they don't have to go through the horror show that I went through. And from that point on, I started My Sister's Keeper of Northeast Ohio. And I have just been using my voice to make a lot of noise, to educate people, especially African-American people, because my culture do not believe in mental health at all. They think, African-American people believe more in the church. So we go to the church, and anything outside of that, they look at it as the devil, or that's not right, or they didn't really take it seriously. And my father being a pastor, it was really hard for me. And I got backlash. So much horrible stuff happened in his church among his congregation when I started speaking out about my mental illness. But I want to educate people that look like me to try to get them to know that having your faith is great if you can have your faith. But having mental stability is also great. And God created therapists and the things to help us get healthy. So I want to do that with the educational piece. The other piece is financial. A lot of people that look like me cannot afford therapists. I am very lucky because I have a job and I have good insurance, so I could pay to see my therapist. My insurance pays for it. But a lot of people that look like me cannot afford the insurance or have Medicaid or something for low income people, and they can't really pay for a therapist because it really is expensive. So what my organization is doing now, and right before COVID hit, was we're lobbying the state legislator here to try to get in place some type of funding for people who cannot afford it. And because I believe that a lot of homeless people, if they had the means to get the insurance to go see a therapist or a psychiatrist, that they would not be homeless. That's my whole theory. And I've talked to many people about it. So that's the other piece to that. Another piece is accessibility. A lot of people who look like me live in the inner city, and there's just not therapists around. The Cleveland Clinic is great and I love them, but that is, and not to say anything bad, but they take insurance. To see a private therapist is usually way out in like suburbia, not in the inner city. So what I want to do is have some type of transportation put in place for people who actually, even if it's just giving them bus tickets or having a peer supporter go with them to their appointments, so they're able to get to these people, or even have one idea that I had, and I'm really pushing for it, is having therapists that will go to like community centers in the inner city and we'll see people that way. I'm still working some kinks out in that, but we'll see how that goes after COVID. But my main push is to get people who look like me the help that they need, the care that they need, break the stigmas within my culture, and let them know that, hey, it's okay for you to speak out and say that you have a mental disorder. It's okay for you to seek treatment and not have to worry about your family like mine did, backlash you or cut you off or do all kinds of other different things. I want everybody to feel comfortable in their own skin. And that's why I started My Sister's Keeper, because that's what we're here for. We're here to, I tell everybody, I'm the voice for the people who don't have a voice or who don't know how to use their voice. And I got into advocacy, first of all, because I was mad. I was really upset that I got misdiagnosed. I was really upset that I was mistreated because I went, and I don't want to get off topic, but I think this is worth mentioning. I went to a private therapist, and before she even asked me my insurance, she told me flat out, I don't take Medicaid. And she said that because of the color of my skin. I have United Healthcare. I have commercial insurance through my job. She didn't even have to go there. She could have just said, how can I help you? Would have been great. But see, that's what we get. I mean, that's what African-American people get, and myself too. We get that. And we get the misdiagnosis because if we go, like I went and told her I was having thoughts, and she automatically thought it was intrusive thoughts. And I know some young men who have intrusive thoughts of harm or the other, pedophilia, the sexual kind, and they're afraid because they'll go to jail. I mean, they'll go to jail. So, I mean, we need to work together, and these bills, I feel, will help make a dent in that, where we can all get together and say, hey, let's just look at the mental health of these people. And let's just see if we can help them get the help that they need, educate them, let us get educated so we'll know how to help them. Because I've talked to many people who don't want to go to a therapist because they're not Black, because they don't understand where they came from. Well, my therapist, who is a white guy, he took the classes of diversity, so he understands. And we need more of that in the community of mental health in order to help everybody across the board. And I'm just really excited that this is happening, because this is like opening the door. It's not going to change everything overnight, but it will start to get people to listen. And I just think this is a really good forum for that. And I guess I could pass it on to whoever.
I want to make sure I'm not interrupting you, because that was so powerful. Thank you.
No problem.
That was beautiful. And I think about the fact that just 3 years ago, you got diagnosed, and then you brought this powerful voice forward for your community. And what a loss that would be not to have that voice. And I really want to say thank you. That was incredible. It takes on average 17 years for someone to get diagnosed with OCD. Mm-hmm. And I can't imagine what that multiplies by for communities of diversity, for people of color. We know that there's a difficulty in their community with access to care and to stigma, and we know that there is a national issue with getting access to all kinds of healthcare. And so when you multiply that against folks not even understanding what OCD is and being misdiagnosed with schizophrenia, that just, I'll tell you, when my daughter was first diagnosed, one of the things I really thought about was, I feel like I'm standing between her and homelessness. Mm-hmm. And once we understood what the disease was, being able to find answers so quickly was just great. And I'm sorry that you suffered for so long.
Thank you.
But I'm so glad you're here with us today. Thank you.
No problem.
All right. Terrific. Boy, these are some powerful stories, and I'm so glad that everybody's here to be able to listen to them tonight. And I know that you have your own stories, and I know that we always want to hear about those at IOCDF. So please share your stories with us. And when you do learn about a little bit more about how to be an advocate for public policy here in our next couple of sections, I do hope that you'll share your own story or the story of someone that's close to you, because those are the most powerful moments in understanding mental health. All right, terrific. So next I would like to introduce Micah Howe. Micah is a founding member of OCD Iowa, which is one of our affiliate groups. We have affiliates all over the country, and they're great ways for everyone to get involved at a more local level. And he has also served as state captain for Iowa at the National Council for Behavioral Health's annual Hill Day. So he's got some great experience here, and I am so excited to welcome him to speak with us tonight. Micah?
Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you to the IOCDF and all of the partners for putting this on. This is such a hugely important event. And I want to also extend a thank you to each of you, particularly those of you with lived experience, for raising your voice and being involved in this important effort. You know, I often tell people I'm not the first person in Iowa, rural Iowa, that's ever struggled with OCD. But the reason my journey was so hard is because for any number of reasons, there weren't enough sufferers before me that either got the treatment they needed or knew what they were being diagnosed with or were in a position to raise their voice. And so it's so vital for each and every one of us who have lived experience and are in a position where we can say something about our experience to do so. But oftentimes I think people who have lived experience with OCD and related disorders, we struggle to have that confidence in advocacy. I know that I did at one time. There's a sense that, you know, what do I have to offer to legislators, these important people in suits that shape public policy? I don't have certain degrees. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a professor. I'm not a researcher. And so I want to spend just a little bit of time tonight helping you reflect on your lived experience and why it is so valuable in the shaping of laws and issues in society. But before I mention the 3 reasons I want to offer for the benefits of lived experience advocacy, I want to help you think about, as you go into this virtual advocacy tomorrow, that it's okay if you feel a little unsure. It's okay if you don't feel like a professional advocate, because the truth is, most of us don't. I can tell you right now, this is not where I thought I would be 5 years ago. This is not where I thought I would be 10 years ago. I was a high school student who was active in sports, who was doing wonderful in school. I never really thought that much about going to a therapist. I certainly never saw myself in a partial hospitalization program that I would be at for months at a time. I wanted to be a pastor or a lawyer. I was going off to do something very different. And the fact of the matter is, that is some version of the story that most of us have. We had some other plans before our diagnosis, and all of a sudden, we're wearing the hat of advocate. So don't feel bad if you say to yourself, I didn't expect to be here, because that's part of the bittersweet nature of advocacy. It's more a response to your suffering than it is something that you always plan to do. And so if you're learning as you go, be encouraged. I'm learning as I go. I'm learning from every conversation that I have with a senator or a congresswoman. It's a process. And so embracing this as a learning experience is so important. But again, I said I would talk about lived experience, and I would make a few comments about why it's so vital, because you need to go into advocacy not only knowing what you want to say, but understanding the value of what you have to say. So the first thing I would say to you is your lived experience has unique value. It's okay if you don't have a doctorate. It's okay if you do not have a license to treat mental illnesses, because here's what's going on in society. Whether we're talking about lawyers and judges and juries in courtrooms, whether we're talking about parents and teachers in classroom conferences, whether we're talking about HR personnel in the corporate world. We have this phenomenon happening in our world where many of the discussions that are taking place on the topic of mental health and what to do about it, ironically, involve everybody but the people who actually suffer with these disorders. You may be surprised to know this, but the truth is your voice is missing in most of the pertinent discussions about mental health going on out there. You have something unique to offer that is not being heard every day. Even in legislature, they have a lot of people coming to them, offering them statistics, offering them trends, offering them ideas, proposals. But what they're not getting a lot of is people saying, this is what it's like to live in a brain that does this every day of my life. This is what this does to a person's self-esteem. This is what this illness does to a person that causes them to drop out of college and not be able to continue their dreams. This is what it does to family finances. And you would be amazed how interested your legislators are in your unique individual story. You don't realize oftentimes how interesting and engaging and vital it is because you've lived it for so long. You've suffered and it's not fun. And so pretty soon it's like, what is my suffering worth? Who wants to listen to this? And the answer is lots of people. And not just people, lots of people with power and influence in society to help others. So your lived experience is uniquely valuable. Secondly, your lived experience is credible. There is something sincere and honest and valuable about your specific mental health narrative. What do I mean by that? Oftentimes legislators, and I've been to Washington, D.C., I've got to brush shoulders with some of them. There are a lot of people trying to get their attention because these people shape the world we live in. And oftentimes, the people that are trying to speak to them have motives that the legislators aren't entirely sure they can trust. For example, there are lobbyists that are hired by interest groups to make the arguments that benefit those groups in front of legislators. But your senators and your congressmen, they know that they're being paid to say what they say. They know that they're making a living giving them an angle that advocates for whatever policy positions the group they represent wants the legislator to know. When you tell your story, they know you're not being paid to say what you've experienced. And even better, if you are their constituent and you are telling them what life in their district has been like with a mental illness, there are few presentations as credible and believable as that kind of story. I have seen legislators almost start dozing off listening to lobbyists. And as soon as I opened my mouth to tell my story, they were on the edge of their seat listening because they care and because they knew that I did not come halfway across the country to tell them a story that wasn't true, but I live in their district and I want people like me to be better off. You will benefit from the same vote of confidence that I've benefited from. So be bold in your advocacy. Understand that you are uniquely positioned with your story to have an impact that a lot of other people can't have. And that brings me to my final point this evening. Last but not least, your lived experience advocacy is welcome. I know it can be hard when we are suffering. We've opened up maybe to a friend, maybe to a family member about our suffering, and maybe it didn't go as well as we hoped. Maybe if you're like me, you were at college and asked for accommodations and you weren't met with the warm willingness to help that you hoped. And so there can be this sense that maybe I'm not going to be welcomed when I tell my legislators my story. I can tell you that in all the legislators that I've spoken with, I have never seen anything but openness. This is an issue they are willing to learn about in many cases. And you can feel safe and assured that telling your story is helpful and that they are willing to listen to it. I was sitting down in a cafe type setting with a legislator not long ago. And as I told him my story and we got up to leave, he was moved to tears and I could see the shakiness in his face. And he said, I just want you to know that I'm not even sure what's going on with my son, but my son is struggling. And it really touches me that you are out here trying to help other people like you. And I don't say that to toot my own horn, guys. I say that because your lived experience can have the exact same impact on your local representatives. So please remember when you go to advocate, when you write those emails, your lived experience is an incredible asset. Pour your emotion into what you say. Tell them your story. Tell them how your life would be different if some of the bills being proposed had existed. I'm very passionate, as other speakers have been, about these telehealth bills. Why? Because if telehealth had existed years ago when I was going through the battles I had gone through, it would have changed the trajectory of my life. I may not have had to leave my home state to find the therapy that I needed. And if I am speaking with Senator Grassley, it matters to him that an Iowan had to leave their home to find the mental health care that they needed. And it will matter to the senators and the congressmen in your district. So remember, your lived experience is valuable, it is credible, and it is welcomed. And I wish you all the best in your advocacy tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Micah. Wow, that brought back so many memories, and it's amazing how it all ties together. The perfectionism, so many of us have perfectionism and really want to do it the right way. And I love that you've really welcomed us here to just be ourselves and to do it the way we do it, to tell our own personal stories. I used to almost feel a little embarrassed when I sit down in front of folks because I don't have a PhD after my name. And I would say, the phrase I would use is, I'm just a mom. But I don't say that anymore. I walk into meetings now and I say, I'm a mom, and I'm going to share my experience so that your child or grandchild or friend's child doesn't have to live the same way our family did for so long. And that is, Micah, you're absolutely right, exactly what resonates with people. That's what causes change. And with OCD happening in at least 1 in 10 folks over their lifetime, there's really no one I talk to who doesn't immediately have a story about themselves or a friend's child or their child or a parent or someone that they're worried about. It's something people want to know about. And there's so little information out there that sharing your story. I loved Kate's note that I saw in the chat that maybe it's not being a lobbyist, maybe it's being an advocate and a personal storyteller. I think that's spot on. And it's exactly what each of us who are here are really being called to do. So thank you. That was terrific. Okay, so now we get to a very important part of this evening, which is learning a little bit about some advocacy training. How do we become advocates that can move forward with tomorrow's day of action? So I'm really delighted to introduce all of you to Vinay Krishna, who is a writer, attorney, and activist. He lives in Brooklyn, and he's the National Field Organizer for the Center of Popular Democracy. He helps lead campaigns to end the overdose epidemic and achieve Medicare for all. Vinay is a mental health advocate for the International OCD Foundation. We're so glad to have him with us, and also for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. I mentioned that he's also a writer, and he writes both fiction and nonfiction and has been published in a number of magazines. So we hope to see a lot more of your writing going forward, and know that you'll incorporate OCD into that as you do write. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Vinay for our next section.
All right, well, thank you all for being here. Thank you for having me. Thanks to IOCDF. And yeah, all the speakers so far have really been wonderful. And I love that everyone is emphasizing storytelling. I love that Micah emphasized lived experience. And so I'm going to talk a bit about how to take that lived experience and those stories and turn it into action that can really lead to tangible change. So just a few words about me first. My name is Vinay. I've had OCD since I was about 11, I'd say. It's harm OCD, lots of intrusive thoughts of violent scenarios happening to loved ones. And I think it's always important to mention that, because even within mental health communities, not everyone is familiar, with harm OCD or knows, what exactly that is. So I think it's always good to flag that. So I mentioned it started when I was about 11 and I was diagnosed. Sorry, I started when I was 13 and I was diagnosed when I was 24. So as I think Tawana and a few other people have mentioned, that's 11 years without treatment for a very serious condition. And if I had a physical illness, if you had lupus or cancer, if you tripped tomorrow and broke your leg, you would never wait 11 years to see a doctor, right? So there's still a huge gap in our country between how we approach and treat mental illness and physical illness. And I think what we're doing today, what we're doing tomorrow is, a small step in shrinking that gap. And I'll talk a bit about more, about how that works. So I went to 9 weeks of inpatient treatment back in the summer of 2016. And at that point, I was not an advocate. I never really told anyone about my mental illness. But being there for 9 weeks, seeing people, do exposure therapy, directly confront their obsessions over and over again, I just felt compelled to use my words and start writing about it. So I wrote an essay about my time in inpatient treatment, and that kind of began my, volunteer time as an activist in terms of mental illness. Professionally, though, as Susan mentioned, I'm currently the national field organizer for the Center for Popular Democracy. It's a nonprofit working on, pro-worker rights, pro-immigration rights, healthcare rights, and I'm focused on the healthcare work. And so basically, we're working to expand healthcare access to everyone in the country. We're working to end the overdose crisis. Before COVID started, the overdose crisis was the public health crisis of our time. And also, we're working to lower prescription drug prices for everyone. And of course, there are mental health overlaps in all three of those campaigns. It's so crucial to all of that. So that's kind of my personal story, professional story. And I put together a few slides, just like 10 quick slides that'll kind of give you some basic advocacy, tips and tools that'll lead into Will and Stephanie. I believe we're going to talk a bit about the specific bills you're going to work on tomorrow. But I'll just tell you a personal story before I jump into the slides about how my first kind of foray into all this was 3 years ago when the Senate was considering overturning the Affordable Care Act. My organization, who I didn't work for at the time, I just went down as a volunteer, went down as a protester to try to stop them from doing that. And it involved all of us just telling our personal stories. So I went down and I sat in Senate offices and I talked about having OCD, talked about depending on the ACA to survive. And it was just person after person telling their personal stories. And as Micah mentioned, you would often see staffers crying, listening to these stories. And we convinced the three wavering senators to protect the ACA and protect healthcare for over 30 million people. And so for me, that was kind of a transformative experience, seeing people tell their stories and actually change the whole course of the country. And I've seen that happen time and time again. And I hope, it can happen with mental health too. And so I went down as a protester. I got arrested a few times. Then I kept going back and, took on legal support because I'm a lawyer. And they hired me as a consultant, and now I'm the national field organizer. So it's kind of a strange career path, not exactly typical, your usual jail networking story that we all have. I'm sure we all have that. So yeah, so now professionally, working on the healthcare stuff, on my personal time, I was doing mental health stuff. And so now I'm trying to bridge those worlds as much as I can, like events like tonight, which is great. So I'm going to share my screen. I'll quickly go through a couple of slides, and then I'll come back and I'll tell a few more stories and then kick it over to Will and Steph. So here we go. All right, so virtual voices for mental health, that's what we're doing today. And for my part of the talk, I have 3 basic goals. I wanna just like talk to you about our theory to win and like why telling these stories like actually works. And some of the other speakers kind of alluded to that, and I'll give you some concrete examples. Then I'll go through like what your email is actually gonna look like and like how you kind of construct your story. And then, I'll just plug like today should be the start of your advocacy, not the end. And I hope you keep in touch and we'll figure out what the next advocacy day looks like. So I'll just put in a plug for that at the end. But one quick thing before I start is whenever I do like a training like this or talk to people about being advocates, I always ask them like, why might you not want to do this? Why might you be hesitant? And if this was a pre-COVID time, if we were all in the same room, I kind of lead a discussion about it. But I can just cut to the chase. And the 2 main reasons I hear over and over again from people is that, well, I'm not an expert. Like, I don't know the law. I don't know the policy. Like, who am I to be talking to a senator or a congressman? Like, this isn't really my job. And to that, I always tell them, and like, if you forget everything else I say today, I hope you remember this, is that you all are experts on your own story, right? Like, I could talk to Susan for hours and she's still going to be more of an expert on her own story than I am, right? Same for Micah, same for Tawana, same for everyone on this call. So because you're an expert on your own story, you don't have to know like every little in and out of the law or the legislation. You don't have to know the history of the policy or the history of the senator or the representative. What's important is that you know how these issues affect you directly. And if they affect you that way, then chances are they're going to affect thousands of other people that way, often millions. So just focus on what you know, just like be genuine and tell your story. Today we're focusing on telehealth a lot, so just talk about how that affects you. And if it affects you, it's going to affect a lot of people. And we'll talk you through how to make a concrete ask at the end of it. But I want everyone here to feel empowered that you have everything you need to do this work. Like if you have your story, you have everything you need. And the second question I get a lot is, well, does any of this really matter? Is anyone listening? Does us sending these emails or telling these stories actually matter? And like, as you learned from my Affordable Care Act example, it like absolutely matters. And that's because our theory to win is the second one is you bring constituents to their representatives over and over again with specific asks. And that's how you move the needle on your issues. That's how you make change. And my boss often tells me that in order to make change, you need like lots and lots of money or lots and lots of people. And we have the people, right? Like there are so many more of us than people who don't care about these issues. So I'm glad, I think I saw the counter was up to like 50 or 60 people on this call, which is great for something like this. And like there's so many people who care about this. And if you can mobilize them, we can absolutely get people to care about these issues. We can absolutely get our representatives to be responsive to us because that's their job. And if they're not responsive to us, we can find other leaders who will be, right? Like that's another power we wield. So yeah, those are the 2 main things. Like we have the people, and if you just keep making these asks over and over again, you can actually make change. So there's lots of ways you can do that. So I like to, these are like all the advocacy tools in the toolkit, and they're escalating in terms of like what they ask of you. So like obviously the highest ask would be like civil disobedience, like to get arrested, like I mentioned, like that's asking a lot, right? That's, not everyone's going to be comfortable with that. And the lowest threshold is kind of like what we're doing now, sending emails or signing a petition, sending a letter. And if you're more comfortable, if you want to get more engaged, you can make a phone call, actually talk on the phone with someone. Post-COVID, you can actually go and meet someone for an office visit. Bird dogging is in the middle. If anyone's interested in that, I can talk to you about it after, but basically that's talking to a representative at a town hall, at a public event, directly addressing them publicly, on camera about, your issues. And then there's protesting and civil disobedience. And it's important to remember that we're pushing all of these levers at once. it's a ladder in terms of the threshold, but it's not sequential, right? Like all of these things are happening at once. So as we're sending these emails tomorrow, there are other organizations like mine, which actually did civil disobedience this morning on healthcare issues in DC. There are other organizations like the National Institute of Health, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, who are doing these lobby visits and doing bird dogging. So all of these things are happening at once. So I want you to know that what you're doing tomorrow is incredibly important. And just like if you think of a sports team, Lakers won a title last night. I don't know if people are excited. I'm pretty excited about that. People have different roles on the team, right? So some people are going to be doing civil disobedience because that's what they're comfortable with and they're equipped to do. Some people are going to be doing the lobby visits. And what we're doing tomorrow is sending these emails, and they're all equally important. You're pushing all the levers. You're all, functioning as a team. So I just kind of wanted to give you that scope that what you're doing, like you're plugging into a much larger effort. There are organizations across the country working on these bills, working on these issues. So we're doing important stuff tomorrow. Just wanted to make that clear. And then, so what are the ingredients of a good story? We talked a lot today about storytelling. I'm glad that's kind of like a theme everyone is hitting because it's really the crux of all of this. And I think you start with something personal. You talk about, your personal experience. I know telehealth is kind of the through line through a lot of these bills. So how is that affecting you? Like, what is your particular problem? And then you generalize, because if it's affecting you, it's affecting a lot of people. You're not going to a representative, because there's a hole in your fence, right? You're going to a representative because the water isn't clean or the air isn't clean or you don't have access to healthcare. These are societal problems. And then you're making an ask. And the great thing about this event is the IOCDF has made that last part totally easy. Like we have all the bills, we have the ask, it's all kind of set up. And you're just gonna plug in number one, you're just gonna plug in your personal story. So I know lots of people, this is like your first foray into advocacy. It's gonna be really easy, it's gonna be comfortable, and I hope it's the first of many forays for you. I think Stephanie and Will are talking in depth about the bills after me, but here's a little screenshot of them. And this is like the kind of template you'll get in your email. So it has all the bills and it ends, with the ask, which I guess, yeah, the ask is over here. Please co-sponsor the following bills. And over here, you're just gonna tell your story. So as I mentioned before, this kind of tracks what I mentioned earlier, right? Like you start with your story, you talk about how it affects everyone, and then you say like, will you actually support these bills? So I made like a little sample. You don't have to use this if you have other ideas, but an example of one way this could go is you could say, I depend on weekly therapy to manage severe obsessive compulsive disorder, but my insurance will not cover telehealth sessions, and it is not safe for me to see my therapist in person during COVID. I can't afford to pay for therapy out of pocket and still pay rent and keep food on the table for my family. Millions of others like me have been isolating for months during this pandemic, separated from the care they need. We're experiencing a mental health crisis in America, and we need your support. And then comes the ask, please co-sponsor the following bills. And the bills will all be listed. So that's a little sample, and I can share this PowerPoint before we start off tomorrow. If people find this helpful. I'm not sure how helpful it is. But yeah, that's just one example of telling your story, and you can plug in as many details as you want. I believe we have an 800 character limit, and this example is about like 420 characters. So you can actually add like almost double this. So that kind of gives you a sense of what you can talk about. But like a concise paragraph is really all you need to do. And I think that's about it. Yeah, I just wanted to remind you of this because if you're interested after tomorrow in engaging further, like, contact the IOCDF, contact Stephanie. If you want to plug into, the kind of things my organization is doing, let me know. And then before we kick it off, I just wanted to say a few more notes. So those were some tools that were significant. And so before we get started tomorrow, I just wanted to mention like a few things I found in my work is that like I'm kind of driven by this quote from The Great Gatsby, which I don't know if people are familiar with, but the quote is, there is no difference among men of race or intelligence so profound as the difference between the sick and the well. And that's really driven like all my work. I've always been drawn to healthcare work. I think ableism is like the biggest structural problem in America. And I think there's like this misconception that America just like grows gentler over time, like enough time passes and things just get better. And that's not true. Things don't magically get better over time. They get better because people choose to act. And sometimes it's lawyers, sometimes it's teachers or volunteers and activists, but it's people like you on this call, right? People who are directly impacted, who wield the power. And if you use that power, to talk to your representatives over and over again, you can really make change on these issues. So yeah, I saw it happen, with the Affordable Care Act, like I mentioned. I've seen it happen on a variety of other issues, and I'm confident that I hope you all feel empowered that what you're doing is important and you can bring about that sort of change tomorrow. Yeah, so I think that's all I had.
And Vinay, I saw somebody asked for your contact information, so maybe you'll share that in the chat that they're interested in reaching out to you afterwards. So if you wouldn't mind sharing that, that would be terrific.
Sure, yeah.
Great. I really appreciate that. First of all, I just want to start by saying thank you for sharing a little bit about harm OCD and your story with that. I think that's a really critical type of OCD that a lot of people don't know about. And I'll never forget attending a session at the OCD conference a few years ago with a relative of mine, a young person who sat in a harm OCD session and heard people tell their stories, and the level of relief that he felt at hearing that his story was not his alone, but was a part of his brain in the way it was reacting, and that it was a relatively commonplace experience within the OCD community was very, very intense. And I appreciate your willingness to share just a little bit about that. I'm sure there's someone hearing that for the first time that's now Googling harm OCD to see a little bit more what that's about. So thank you. I was reminded earlier when Tawana was speaking about another type of OCD that people don't know very much about, which is scrupulosity, which often really can impact people's availability to access when they're tightly in religious communities. And I liked her earlier comment as well about it's good to have your religion and it's also good to have your mental health. And we very firmly believe that you can do both. So both of those may be things you want to learn more about. And I also just so appreciated your sharing the steps and the different levels of advocacy there are. I think that's so incredibly important for all of us to understand. I was thinking a little bit about what I would be writing when you laid out the way that you might make your ask. And I was thinking to myself, I've personally accessed telehealth, but it's not necessarily for OCD. And so how will I talk about that? And I was reminded of why I got into advocacy in the first place. And that's because when my daughter was very ill at age 6, didn't think she was going to be able to go to school, couldn't ever imagine her dating or driving a car. I didn't know how we were going to keep our jobs and still care for her. A local doctor gave us the name of 50 doctors, psychiatrists and psychologists we could reach out to. All 50 of them would not treat a 6-year-old. And so we ended up driving 2.5 hours. And, there was so much in that being able to drive 2.5 hours, being able to take that much from time off of work was a privilege. And it reminded me that in prior generations in my family, that would not have been possible, and that I knew it was not possible for a lot of my friends' families. And so to get involved and to try to find access to care to everyone is so critically important. And to me, that's what telehealth is doing. It's crossing state boundaries. It's getting people that are in neighborhoods that don't have access to care, as Tawana was pointing out to us earlier, that they can reach out, that they don't have to take a bus or get transportation, that they can actually make a phone call and actually get good and efficient treatment for OCD. So I just appreciate how much you've highlighted that for all of us. All right, so the next and final section before our Q&A is actually going to be Will Sutton and Stephanie Kogan, who are from the International OCD Foundation up in Boston, working, I think, primarily remotely right now. And I just want to do a little call out to both of these folks. Will is our program manager and Steph is our program director. And they, along with Jeff Szymanski, our executive director, have worked, I don't know how many hours, but they have managed to transform our organization from an in-person organization in terms of our conferences and our communication into a virtual organization. And I'm not sure we knew at the beginning of the pandemic two things. The first, how much work it would be, because it has been an immense effort on everyone's part to transform. But but even more importantly, how effective it would be. I don't think we imagined a day like this when we had 60 or so people on the call and then another 300 people that were interested in taking action. And so the bright side of COVID for us has definitely been that we are able to reach so many more people and have so much more effective platforms now that we have virtual platforms that we're all comfortable with. So I just want to do a quick call out to you guys to say thank you. We really appreciate all of your efforts to transform the organization. And I know so many people are appreciating that as well. So with that, I believe I'm going to turn it over to Will, who is going to give us some specific training on what we are going to be doing tomorrow. Will, it's all yours.
Thank you, Susan. So let me just share my screen here. 1 second. Okay, so we've heard a lot from different folks who have shared their stories, talked about how to share their stories. We're going to get into some of the nuts and bolts now about what exactly we're supporting policy-wise. So we've developed with our partner organizations an agenda of 6 priority bills that we feel will improve access to mental health care for people across the country. And so now I'm going to go through these bills and talk a little bit about what they do, why we thought we should support them, what kind of impact they might make for people struggling to find mental health treatment, whether they have OCD, a related disorder, or really any other mental illness. So we've broken up these bills into really 3 different action alerts that you're going to receive tomorrow. So everyone who's registered for Virtual Voices is going to receive emails tomorrow at 10 a.m., 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And each one of these emails is going to contain an action alert. It's going to take you to our website where you're going to fill in some information. We're going to show you how to do that in just a little bit. But the action alerts are organized around 3 different groups of bills. So the first group of bills is our priority telehealth bills. These bills are geared towards making improvements in a few different areas of telehealth policy, with the goal of making it easier for someone who needs mental health treatment via telehealth to get the care that they need. So what we've tried to move the needle on with these bills is you're trying to make changes to licensure. So for example, when a therapist wants to see someone across state lines, typically they have to be licensed in that state. So a therapist based in Massachusetts who has a client in Connecticut may not be able to see that client via telehealth unless they also have a valid license in Connecticut. We're trying to make sure that private insurers are offering equitable coverage for telehealth and making sure that they treat these services fairly and they're not placing an undue burden on subscribers when they're trying to access telehealth. There's been some really positive changes in terms of telehealth access within Medicare and the Indian Health Service that we want to see preserved. And then we want to make sure that we're learning as much as we can about this huge expansion in telehealth that's happened across the country so that we can understand when and where disparities are happening in terms of race, gender, region of the country, who's able to access telehealth, are there disparities based on the type of technology they're using. All of these things will help inform public policy in the future because we really have this, in huge change that's happened during COVID-19. And we want to know more about it. So I'm going to talk specifically about what these bills are and what they do. So the first bill is the TREAT Act. This was filed by Senator Murphy from Connecticut and has a bipartisan co-sponsorship with Senator Roy Blunt from Missouri. So what this bill would do is, it's a backronym, the TREAT Act, which stands for Temporary Reciprocity to Ensure Access to Treatment. So In that example I just gave about a therapist based in Boston or Massachusetts who's trying to see a client in Connecticut, what this bill would do is it would create temporary license reciprocity in all 50 states so that that therapist based in Massachusetts could practice in Connecticut or Kansas or Missouri, wherever they may need to see a client. So why is this important? I think there's some obvious reasons why it might be important. You know, for people who live in areas of the country where, for example, if they need to see an OCD specialist and there's few in their state, they may not be able to see them. There may be a wait list. So being able to see somebody in other states, particularly states with maybe more population, greater number of therapists, that's going to open up new options for them. Very similar to what Micah was talking about, where he's talking about having to leave his state in order to get treatment. Hopefully with reciprocity, you won't have that problem. There's also been disruption of patient-provider relationships around the country because of COVID. So for example, you may have college students who unexpectedly return home, whether that was this spring, possibly this fall, depending on what happens. How can we prevent those critical relationships from being disrupted, particularly if that patient is moving back to a state where their therapist is not licensed? Well, this bill would help prevent that problem from happening by creating temporary reciprocity. And hopefully this will create a model for the future where we have regulations that allow therapists to practice across state lines more easily. This bill would be temporary during the COVID-19 public health emergency, but you know, we believe in this idea. So we think that if it works, there will be a lot of momentum to keep this policy in place. The next bill is the Frontier Community Act. This bill is focused on telehealth provided by the Indian Health Service. There's been an expansion during COVID-19 for telehealth provided by the Indian Health Service. They've eliminated some restrictions about originating site, and what that means is an originating site is the place where somebody receives care. So for example, you know, when I talk to my therapist, I'm at home and the originating site is my home. Under Medicare and within the Indian Health Service for a long time, there's been restrictions around originating site. So for example, in Medicare, instead of being able to speak with a doctor on a phone or via webcam at home, a Medicare beneficiary would often have to travel to a health center. So they may have to travel, you know, 30, 45 minutes, an hour or more to go to a health center to talk to a doctor in another location. So during COVID-19, these restrictions were suspended in order to protect public health, keep people, especially older and more vulnerable people, out of these hospital settings if they didn't need to be there. And it's done great things in terms of expanding access to telehealth. So what we want to do is see these temporary expansions of telehealth under Medicare and the Indian Health Service extend permanently. The sponsor of this bill has communicated that there's some resistance to doing a nationwide permanent expansion. There's some concerns about how much this might cost our healthcare system. So what they've proposed is sort of an interim step where the telehealth expansions that are happening under Medicare would be permanently extended in the frontier states, so the most rural states of the country where the need for access to telehealth is at the most critical level. These are Alaska, Nevada, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wyoming. And another part of this bill is that it's going to help fund broadband infrastructure improvements in these areas. So we know that, at least for OCD, exposure and response prevention, you know, an evidence-based treatment for OCD, when it's delivered via video teleconferencing, can be effective. But many people live in parts of the country where video teleconferencing is not possible, or it's very difficult to get because of the poor quality of internet access. So if we're going to talk about expanding telehealth in rural areas of the United States, we have to have a conversation at the same time about funding broadband infrastructure improvements, and this bill would do that. The third bill in our telehealth priorities is the Telemental Health Improvement Act, filed by Senator Tina Smith in Minnesota, and co-sponsor Senator Murkowski of Alaska. So this bill would get at what I was talking about earlier about how do we make sure that people aren't being put through extra hoops by their insurance company to access telehealth services, and how do we ensure parity in these services? So we've heard anecdotally from people who their insurer initially during COVID-19 was allowing them to see their therapist via telehealth, but they're putting new restrictions on telehealth, whether that's through prior authorization, co-pays. And then we're also hearing from providers who are not getting the same reimbursement rates that they were when they were providing services to their clients in person. So this is a problem because it affects their ability to continue to provide care via telehealth. In a lot of cases, their costs, whether they're part of a clinic or they're in private practice, are fixed, and they haven't changed under COVID-19. But if their reimbursement rates decline, it's going to affect whether they can see their patients remotely. And that's an important piece for access. So what this bill would do is it would put a new mandate during the COVID-19 public health emergency. So it's a temporary mandate on federally regulated private insurance plans that they need to treat mental health services delivered via telehealth the same way that they treat in-person services. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Stephanie Kogan, and she's going to talk about the Edot Act, the disparities bill, and then also talk about our workforce priorities.
Great, thanks, Will. And just thank you guys also for, I see the questions are coming in, so we're gonna get to those soon. So just keep sending them as they come to you. We appreciate it. So to kind of localize you, so the past three bills that Will talked about, they're all in the Senate. So the ones that I'm going to talk about are all in the House. So now we're shifting from talking about our senators to talking about our representatives. So as Will mentioned, this is the Edot Act, which stands for Evaluating Disparities and Outcomes of Telehealth During the COVID-19 Emergency Act, which is something of a mouthful. And its sponsor is Representative Robin Kelly out of Illinois. So as a lot of the folks who have spoken so far mentioned, something that happened with COVID is we saw, whether we were ready for it or not, we saw this rapid expansion of telehealth. And as Jennifer said, it's kind of been a silver lining because it has increased access. That said, we want to make sure that it actually is a silver lining. We want to start gathering some data. So what EDOT does is it is requiring CMS, which stands for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, to start collecting data about telehealth utilization. And this kind of ties back also to, what Tawana was saying about access to care, and especially in communities of color. So one of the things that the data collection is going to prioritize is that demographic data. So it wants to, they're going to ask who's using this on both sides. So when it says site there, that's talking about the people who are providing the telehealth, and then also who's accessing it and how they're doing it. And so that's how the CMS is going to do it through Medicare. And then they're also going to give grants to states to do it through their Medicaid, just because that's how the states tend to run the Medicaid, whereas Medicare is more federally regulated. So this is, it's kind of a data collection act, but it's helping us to start to figure out what disparities exist in our healthcare system. I mean, anecdotally, again, we all know, but this way we'll have some cold hard facts about it, and that it'll help us to also figure out how to improve our telehealth practices moving forward. Because I do think telehealth is here to stay, even after, knock on wood, COVID leaves us eventually, telehealth will be here to stay. So it'll be great to know what we're working with and how to improve moving forward. Okay, so up next we have, if you want to change the slide. So the last two bills I'm going to talk about, and again, these are still House bills. We're calling them workforce bills, but I do want to emphasize that These do have to do with the mental health workforce, but given so many of us here are folks with lived experiences and we're going to be the ones advocating, I did just want to stress that you don't have to be a therapist or an aspiring therapist to weigh in on these bills, because they affect us all. They affect how we can get our treatment. They can affect who we get our treatment from, and the fact that this treatment is available. So this is still part of us. It's still important to all of us, and not just those of us who want to be therapists or are therapists. So kind of our goals when it comes to these workforce bills are to support the professionals in our community, to increase our access, and to address disparities. So the first of these bills that we are going to do is, and I actually think I saw somebody mention this in the comment, but it's called the Mental Health Access Improvement Act, which was sponsored by Representative Mike Thompson from California and co-sponsored by John Katko in New York. So someone mentioned this already. So I don't know if everybody knows this, but if you are a licensed mental health counselor or a licensed marriage and family therapist, you can't bill under Medicare. And that means for those of us who are seeking treatment, if that's who your therapist is, they can't bill Medicare. So if that's who your treatment, if your insurance is through Medicare, that cuts off a whole section of therapists that you can't access because they currently can't bill your insurance. So that's what the Mental Health Access Improvement Act is seeking to do, to allow LMHCs and LMFTs to bill under Medicare, which will really expand service and who folks in the OCD and related disorders community can get their treatment from. And we can tell you that, as the IOCDF, we do a lot of professional training. And I can tell you how many, LMHCs and LMFTs make up a good portion of people who attend our trainings. So we already know that there's people with these backgrounds who know what they're doing when it comes to OCD treatment, which is so rare to begin with. And so now if we have the ability to bill them under Medicare, it's really going to expand treatment access to our community. So that's with that one. And then the final one is the Mental Health Professionals Workforce Shortage Repayment Act of 2019. So given that it's last year, you can see that this one's kind of been in the hopper for a bit. It was John Katko was the lead sponsor, and with a co-sponsor of Grace Napolitano out in California. So what this is seeking to do is it's offering to repay some of the student loans that people in mental health professions have as a way of incentivizing them to work in areas of critical shortage. So how they define critical shortage is that there's one or fewer mental health professionals for every 30,000 people. So that's kind of staggering because 30,000 is a lot of folks. So we're already working in these underserved areas and we're just trying to get more folks to work there. So to kind of bring it into context, if you were to apply what we know about how common OCD and other mental health conditions are, of those 30,000 people, around 7,500 will have any mental health diagnosis, and around 360 of those will have OCD or related disorder. So that's a big chunk of people who this would help increase access to if we could get some OCD therapists to be in these critical shortage areas. So it's seeking to incentivize folks working in these need areas, and it's offering them 6 years of repayment assistance of their loans, which those of us who have been through grad school, we can tell you that's a good chunk of change, and that's a big help of up to $250,000. So yeah, I think that's the main summary of our bills. I know the chat has been really blowing up, but I think first, before we get to the questions, Will, I'm going to pass it back to Will because he's going to go through the actual system we're going to be using tomorrow. So we can kind of get a preview of what it's going to be like and show you guys what it's going to look like before we go to questions.
Let me just take a moment to transition my screen. I know we have a lot of questions in the chat, so we'll try to get to as many of those as we can afterwards.
Sure, and then while Will's transitioning, I can say that anything that we don't get to, please send to advocacy@iocdf.org, and I'll put that email in the chat, and then we can respond to you via email as well.
Okay, so you should all be able to see a web browser. So what this screen that you're looking at is so tomorrow, as I mentioned, you're going to get 3 action alert emails, and in each one of these emails you'll see a link and it says take action. What we'd like you to do is click the link and it will bring you to our website, and you'll see a form that looks like this. So what you're going to do is enter your address, your street address, and your zip code. That will bring you to a second screen that looks a little bit like this. So what you'll do here on the left side is you'll fill in your contact information like I've done here. And then there's a box here, and this is where you're going to include your story. So we've provided a template for you, so you don't have to necessarily remember all of the information that we've shared about the bills and why we think they're important. But we've added a box so that you can tell your own personal story. So that's going to be in this box here. So for example, my congressman is Stephen Lynch, and I want to express to him why I think that these workforce bills are important. So, for example, I have heard from countless people through my work at the IOCDF about their struggles to access mental health treatment. We're lucky to have great hospitals in the Boston area, have a lot of therapists, but as people are even mentioning in the chat tonight, there's still many people who cannot access care. And so, for example, the Mental Health Professionals Workforce Shortage Loan Repayment Act, it's a mouthful. It's targeted at geographic areas, but also at facilities where there's an identified shortage of mental health workers. So the Health Resources and Services Administration has identified that there's a shortage. So, my rep lives in South Boston. One of these places is the South Boston Community Health Center. So, that's my personal story on this issue. That's what I would share. Just to give you a idea of, well, looks like I can't preview this, but as you saw on the previous screen, you have a box there that kind of shows where your story is going to be inserted into the email. And then when you hit preview, you can see what it's going to look like, make any tweaks that you want, and then you can send the email. So it's pretty straightforward. You'll get 3 of those action alerts throughout the day. You'll get something that looks very similar to what I just showed you each time.
Yeah, and as Will said, each of those action alerts will have that spot for you to tell your own story. And I hope that if you take away nothing else from tonight, I hope that what Tawana and Vinay and Micah have impressed upon you is that your story makes all the difference. So we really do encourage you guys to take advantage of the box to share your story. I know it's not necessarily going to be enough characters to do it justice, but as Vinay showed us, with some nice efficient sentences, you should still be able to get a really great, a really impactful story across.
So we have some questions about how to access the forms if you didn't register. So it's very simple. Just go to iocdf.org/advocacy and click on the banner that says Virtual Voices. You'll see a link to the Action Center. Anyone can click on that. You don't have to be registered, and it will take you to the same screen that you just saw. So let's see, do we have other questions here?
So are you guys going to put the link in this as well in case folks want to share that out on social media tonight?
Sure, we can put a link to, it looks like Fran just did that.
Okay, perfect. That looks awesome. Thank you. I can't believe how easy you guys have made it. That's literally, I've done a few different of these and it's always feels so complicated to figure out what you're doing. And you guys have done a nice job of making this easy.
Yeah, so in some cases your representative or your senator might already be a co-sponsor of these bills. We've sort of picked out who those people are and matched them with where you live. So if you live in an area with a representative who's already a co-sponsor, instead of seeing that text in the email that explains why the bill is important and asking them to co-sponsor, you'll see a line that says, "Thank you for supporting this bill." So in case you see that. Yeah.
Awesome. That's really great. And I saw there was a question in the chat about how to access the automatic forms. And just to make sure that that's clear, there's the link in the chat that'll show you how to go straight to that. And you guys can share that on social media. You can send it out to your friends via email. Please feel free to ask as many people as possible, even if they're not signed up, to click on that link and they'll be able to send the email out as well.
Yeah, we have a question about, do you have to send the emails at the moment when we send out our action alert? The answer is no. We're going to leave the Action Center up for the week at least. So you can at any point log in, and you don't have to log in. You just visit the web page and fill out the forms that you want to send. However, we definitely would like people to send them around the same time. I think it might help the emails get noticed, kind of signal to congressional offices that it's part of an organized Hill Day. But if for some reason you can't at the times that we send them out tomorrow, that's fine, at any time during the week.
Okay, great. Steph, do you want me to read a few of the questions out and ask you guys for some help? Do we want to bring Vinay back? How do we want to do this next Q&A section?
Sure, yeah. If we want, yeah, if any of the panelists who have spoken are still here, if you guys want to, feel free to,
yeah, it looks like we've got most of our panelists stayed on. So if you guys all want to just go ahead and click on your video and show yourselves, but keep yourselves muted so we don't all pop on at the same time, and we'll just kind of go around and ask some different questions and let people weigh in on things.
Yeah, the one thing I did want to say, because I just saw, I think it was Nancy made a comment about Medicare and Medicaid and how not a lot of current OCD specialists accept those insurances. That is true. But the one thing that we have learned so far, and Vinay may agree or not with this, is that if you can make something happen in Medicare and Medicaid, it trickles down to all the private insurances. That's kind of a thing we've learned the more we've gotten into this policy advocacy world. So I did want to just stress that, just because I know we had a couple things tonight that were really specific to Medicare and Medicaid, though we do also have a couple for the private insurances as well. So just keep that kind of wisdom in your mind, especially if you're someone who doesn't use Medicare and Medicaid for your own insurance or for a loved one's insurance. Just be aware that what happens there trickles down. So it's kind of in all of our best interest to see what we can make happen in Medicare and Medicaid, because then we will all benefit from it. Yeah.
So I saw a question here asking if, I think this is from Rebecca, do all the bills have complementary bills in the other chambers?
Some of them do. We haven't included those in the action alerts for tomorrow. We're really just focusing on, we've got 3 Senate bills, 3 House bills, but none of them are complementary.
Okay, great. And then there was a question from Kristen about why only select rural states were included in the prioritization.
Yep.
Steph, could you maybe touch on that, or Will?
Yeah, sure, I can touch on that. So we would definitely like to see the relaxed rules under Medicare for telehealth be extended permanently all across the country. I mean, it makes it easier for people who are on Medicare, and there's a lot of people on Medicare to get telehealth. And what we've heard is that there may be some resistance in Congress. The Congressional Budget Office that evaluates bills like this to see how expensive they're going to be has expressed, they say that it's been scored negatively in a way. So what the sponsor has tried to do is put forth a sort of a compromise that could be adopted and could demonstrate not only that expanded telehealth is beneficial for people with mental illness, but that it's cost effective as well. And our hopes is that by demonstrating that these expansions can be widened to the rest of the country. And as I mentioned, part of why you'd want to try it in those states first is because those are the states where, of course, there's a critical need for mental health services across the country, but it is especially dire in places where people live, 3 or 4 hours away from a place where there's any mental health services, never mind a specialist who could treat a disorder like OCD.
So is it essentially that sometimes it's, you have to take the low hanging fruit and say, okay, we think we could maybe pass the bill using these states because it's so critically needed. but then we can use those states as kind of a proving ground to expand to additional bills in the future for other states. Is that kind of how that works?
Yeah, that would be the hope.
Yeah, so what's interesting about all this too, so I've been hearing from different clinics now that there is pushback, right? COVID is kind of on its way out. It's not on its way out. And so insurance companies are starting to push back and saying, in the short term, we are seeing increased accessibility. So I think that's the pushback in Congress. I think the debate we've been having internally and with other folks is long term, this will be cost saving for folks. If you get someone who's newly diagnosed, newly symptomatic, into good treatment, that will keep them from ending up in a partial hospital down the road. But there is this very short-term thinking, I think, that's going on. And I think that's the education we need to do. This is super treatable. Let's get them at 6 years old and treat them so that you're still not paying as an insurance company when they're 15 and when they're 25. And I want to give a shout out to NoCD. I think they're doing really spectacular work about increasing accessibility, increasing teletherapy, and they do have sliding fees and they are working directly with insurance companies. But it really is getting them to see the long view because they're only thinking with their pocketbook. And if we can get them to see that they're actually going to save money and help people, like it's a win-win, guys. But I think we need to find a way to really make that argument.
And I think that same thing applies to us, is that we have to find the places where we can take a baby step so that we can then build on that, right? And so I know for all of us in the community, sometimes that can feel frustrating. I don't want to take a baby step. I want to take the immediate leap to everyone gets telehealth services. But I like the way Kate summed it up in the comments, that we're basically trying to start precedents for care. And so we've got to take this baby step this year and see if we can push these bills forward so that we can build on them next year and have an even more exciting day of action.
And I really like, what Vinay, I'm sorry, it was either Vinay or Micah, tell the story of the life that you wanted to have, that you should have had, that you were a contributing person in the society and you got railroaded by something that wasn't your fault. And then we didn't do our job to help you get back to being who you needed to be and being helpful to others and being able to take care of yourself. Like it's just such a win-win argument that it's just hard to understand what the obstacles continue to be.
So there've been a number of questions in the chat about Medicare and Medicaid. So I'm going to read one from Nancy that I think sums up a big piece of this and then ask you guys to speak to it. She said, I do wonder how to look at what clinicians need that they're unable to get from Medicare and Medicaid. Having spoken to several clinicians about why they do not accept Medicare, I feel that we need to address the needs of clinicians. For example, clinicians may receive payments for services only to have Medicare ask for those payments back. I've been told that clinicians have actually been put out of business because of this.
So I can also speak to that as someone who did direct care for a long time. First of all, Medicaid they don't contract with individual providers. They contract with institutions and clinics. And the runaround with insurance. So I talked with a lot of colleagues of mine and I saw Kate, I think you mentioned this in the comments, like everyone is private pay. Everyone I know started by taking insurance. And so what happens is you have to hire a billing person because it ends up being very time consuming. You send in your billing paperwork, it doesn't get paid. It gets paid randomly. They change the copays. And at the end of the day, so what a lot of providers are doing, I think some of the better providers say, look, I'm going to get rid of insurance and they're going to have a sliding fee. And so they have their top tier and then they have slots for all the way down. I know people that are seeing people for $25 are seeing people pro bono. I have a pro bono case in my caseload. So, again, it's a funny thing where I think us finding a way to have a seat at the table with insurance companies we want to do what we can do. I don't like the idea of someone having to pay for their insurance and then pay out of pocket. Like that's ridiculous. But at the end of the day, yeah, I know a ton of people that either got out of private practice or stopped taking insurance because the insurance companies, including Medicare and Medicaid, don't play by the rules. And so people are providing a service and they're not getting reimbursed.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. I want to make sure that we're clear on one thing, and Will, maybe you could touch on this. What time the form will open so that as people are sharing that on social media, they'll know what time to tell people that they can start using that form. What time will that open, Will?
Yeah, we're going to do the first action alert at 10 o'clock tomorrow, which is when we're going to.
So 10 a.m. will be when that form actually opens for action. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's 10 a.m. Eastern for folks who are
Eastern Standard Time.
Yeah.
Okay, terrific. I'm wondering if any of we did have a comment here, and I'm just going to address it very briefly, which is some questions about the Boston area and the difficulty finding care in the Boston area. And I just want to reflect back to you that I think that is definitely true. And yet that's probably one of the most accessible areas in the nation. And so you take the challenges of the Boston area and multiply that by hundreds when you move into many of the rural areas, and you start to get a sense of the size of the problem. So we don't have any bills specific to Boston, but we are very well aware and appreciate that reflection back that even in an area like Boston that has so many treatment providers where we are actually based, it still can be very, very difficult to get. So we hear you on that. That's an issue throughout the nation. I am wondering if Steph or Vinay or Jeff or Will, if you have any questions for any of the speakers before we have to wind up. We have about another 10 minutes or 6 minutes or so here. And I was just wondering if there was anything that you'd like to call out that you heard earlier and ask any additional questions about from any of our speakers.
Well, I would just say, well, first of all, I think people are bringing up a lot of really great questions about, the state of our healthcare and mental health care system in this, in the chat here. And, this is, as, Vinay was saying, we are one lever of several levers, and we're also a tiny baby lever that is only just getting its feet wet. This is our very first policy advocacy activity. And it's so exciting that so many of you are here and that you're going to be helping us with this. I think the questions you're asking are things we are going to work our way towards. We don't think that our very first Hill Day is going to solve a lot of these big questions, but you know what? It is a step towards it. So I just think trying to keep that perspective in mind as we continue forth is kind of how I'm organizing myself around it, because I'm with you guys. It's really frustrating. And sometimes you kind of you feel helpless, you feel powerless, like, what are we doing? But that's what we're all here. And actually, that would be my question, unless anyone else has anything else for all the speakers to kind of send us off with, if you had a final words of wisdom or something encouraging you wanted to tell folks as we sign off, as to kind of reflect on overnight as we head into tomorrow. That would be
and right before that, I think that's a great way to wrap things up, Steph. I just want to underscore the importance of Tawana and Vinay's participation tonight. Everyone did an absolutely amazing job. One of our biggest initiatives at the foundation right now is getting people of color involved in the organization. And so I'm loving to hear from your guys' perspectives. It's important to have a personal story, but it's, again, if we aren't hearing from all of our community, I find that is problematic. So the more different voices, the more stories we can get involved, I think the more important. We know not just through, you guys were talking about it's important in public policy and advocacy to tell your story, but we know from stigma reduction research, that is 50% of the puzzle. If we're going to reduce mental health stigma, you have to have people tell their story, right? And then we have to educate, and then we have to have steps. And so I agree with you, Steph, like this is a step and there are 1,000 more, but every step is important. So who wants to kind of sign us off with words of wisdom?
Can I just throw something in real fast?
Please.
Yeah, I saw a comment in the chat there, I believe by Jen, asking, what do I do if I don't have lived experience and I'm a family member or something like that? And I just wanted to say, one of the things I think that gets lost in these mental health issues is the pain of parents and spouses and siblings, because the focus is so much on helping the sufferer. But I just want to say to any parents watching, if you're a spouse, a brother or sister, legislators need to hear your story as well. of what it's like to watch a loved one suffer with one of these disorders, because these disorders are so insidious, and watching somebody's dreams fall apart as mental illness rips it out from under them and battling back, there's something uniquely painful about that. And so don't feel like your experience is secondary or doesn't deserve to be mentioned in advocacy, because it absolutely has its place as well.
Think about who our MC is tonight.
And I think that's really true for siblings. If any of you have siblings yourselves or have kids that are siblings of someone that suffered, they also have a very powerful voice that we've really been hearing in the last few years. So please encourage them to come forward and speak to. Vinay, do you have some last words to leave us with?
Sure. Well, I know someone mentioned earlier that there's just like so much going on right now in this country. Like there's important election coming up, Supreme Court battle, there's COVID, there's racial uprisings, there's just all this stuff going on. So like, is this like really that important? And I would argue like this is the best time to be talking about these issues, because the COVID crisis is a mental health crisis. Like everyone who is managing mental illnesses, from what I've seen, they're managing them in ways they've never had to before and facing challenges they never had to before. But also there are so many healthy people who now kind of got a glimpse of what it's like to live with like fear of your mortality and fear of losing loved ones and experiencing anxiety and depression and isolation in ways they never have. And then you look at the racial uprisings around the role of police and prisons and the criminal justice system. And so often people with mental illnesses encounter police when they should be encountering doctors or mental health professionals. And cities are reevaluating what to do with their budgets. The federal government is involved. And I just think like now is the best time to be arguing for investments in mental health, for greater access to mental health, for people telling these stories and destigmatizing it, because like I think there's so much going on, so much of it is stressful, and people feel like, oh, like why am I like alive during this moment? This is so difficult. But I don't think it's a burden. I think it's like an opportunity. Like I'm grateful to be alive at a time when I can actually like help transform this country and do some good. And I think like that's the moment we're in right now. So I hope people don't feel burdened by this. I hope they feel empowered going forward.
Awesome. Tawana, would you like to give us some last thoughts?
My main thought is for everyone to speak their truth, regardless on if it makes the earth shake when you do it, even if it makes people mad or embarrassed or you get backlash, because there's other people I'm finding out that will embrace you when other people turn you away. So I'm encouraging everybody, speak your truth, speak it loud, because your voice will help others who can't speak at all.
Thank you. And I think on that note, we've come to the 9 o'clock hour, and Tawana, that was a beautiful way for us to end. Each of us are speaking for those who have not yet found their voice, and that is an incredibly important moment. And I have everyone here on the call is motivated to understand that you represent hundreds of people and that your voice is going to matter. We're going to take our first steps this year because we know we have a long fight to go into the future, but the time to start really is now. So please reach out to us if you have any further questions. All those links are in the side chat, and this will be recorded and sent out to everyone who has registered. So guys, I can't tell you how much it's meant for me to be here. There have been a couple of times, especially with our speakers, that I was like, oh, please don't cry in the middle of being the MC. That would be a very bad idea. But these stories are so powerful. And if you can move us here, just think what you can do if you bring those stories to your elected representatives. So thank you.